Hi, I'm Margaret McKeown, retired professor and researcher from University of Pittsburgh. I'm going to talk to you about vocabulary learning, and I'm going to use a short PowerPoint because I think if you both hear it and see it, it stays in your mind better. So first, some facts about what we know about what vocabulary knowledge and vocabulary learning are, and then which words and what kinds of activities are most effective for instruction, and finally some actionable steps for the classroom. First of all, vocabulary knowledge is a network of connections. So that's kind of what you have in your head about the words you know. And it means that learning a new word is a process of building connections from that word that you're just learning to other words you already know, to experiences that you can associate with that word. And this set of connections helps word meaning become stable so that you can quickly access the meaning or the relevant pieces of the meaning that you need for some new context in which you meet the word. Vocabulary learning is incremental. This is an incredibly important thing to know and understand about vocabulary knowledge. And it means that a word is really unlikely to be learned the first time you encounter it, even if you've looked it up in the dictionary, even if you get a good definition for it. And that's because you need to build those connections. So knowledge of a word grows each time you encounter it in another context, because again, it's those connections that keep getting added and make it possible for you to access that meaning. Words have nuances of meaning in multiple senses. This is something that makes learning words kind of tricky, and why you need so many encounters with words, because every time they're in a new context, they can mean something just slightly different. Words are kind of slippery that way. So a lot of words have negative and positive connotations, for example. So you might see the word, because of his behavior, he had to pay the consequences. So, oops, that was bad. Something bad happened. But then you might see a sentence that says, as a consequence of studying every night, he passed his test with flying colors. So there, the consequence was a good thing. Many words have both concrete and abstract senses. So again, they'll appear to mean somewhat different things in different contexts. For example, erode. Ground can erode, but trust can erode. A foundation is something very physically present in a building, but a friendship can also have a foundation. Suspend can be physical as something's hanging in the air, or something like an event can be suspended. So turning now to vocabulary learning, the goal of vocabulary learning should be to give students knowledge of how to use words and how to interpret contexts in which the word appears. So if you saw the sentence, when the winners were announced, Sarah ran up to console Meg. You don't need just to know that console means to make someone feel better. You need to know that, well, if you're consoling someone, the situation must be that something negative happened. So if winners were announced, Meg must not have been among the winners, therefore she lost, you need to console her. And all that happens like that if you know the word console really well, have lots of connections, and you can bring all that to mind. Let's think about vocabulary instruction. Which words and what kinds of activities work best, are most effective? So first of all, the sweet spot for words to teach is words that appear more often in print than in conversation, and that are used across domains. My colleagues and I have called these Tier 2 words, and they can be harder for students to learn on their own because they don't appear much in conversation, and yet because they appear across domains, students are liable to meet them frequently, and their meanings again change a little bit depending on what domain the context represents. Tier 2 words are roughly equal to academic words when we're talking about general academic words, and different from words that are specific to content domains. We consider those Tier 3 words, and not really vocabulary words at all, but more like the concepts within the content area. And so they're taught as part of the content. A few examples of academic or Tier 2 words: analyze, consistent, fluctuate, inherent, duration. You can imagine those words being used in a science text, appearing in the newspaper, talking about current events, or even appearing in a novel. So what kinds of instructional activities should we provide? Now, what I'm going to say comes from a consensus that's been forming in the vocabulary field for decades about the kinds of activities, what it takes to effectively teach words. The first is that students should get contextual and definitional information about the words, so explicit context, explicit definition. But after that, they need to get lots of interactions. And this can be any activities that get students to use, think about, and become involved with words. Students really have to get engaged and not just write bland sentences that contain the words. So some actionable steps. First, you need to choose some words. Texts that will be used in the classroom are a perfect resource. Other resources, there are some word lists that contain the kinds of words I'm talking about. Those lists can be found online. The academic word list, the academic vocabulary list are really good resources for choosing words. Second, create friendly definitions and contexts to use to introduce kids to words. So friendly definitions are student-friendly ways, explanations of word meaning. And those, you can get a good start on the kinds of language to use in those from the Cambridge Advanced Learner's Dictionary, which is online. And as far as context, if you just Google sentences using whatever word you're teaching, that can be really helpful. A few examples of friendly definitions. So analyze. When you analyze something, you study it in detail in order to discover more about it. Or fluctuate. If something fluctuates, it changes continuously from one level to another. Now, as you can see, a friendly definition is a full sentence. It really explains the meaning of the word, and it uses the word within that sentence. Number 3, develop some interactions. So these should be something that really students engage in and have to think about, and they're creating their own context, creating responses. So for example, how does temperature fluctuate? How can someone's mood fluctuate? So getting them to think about a word in 2 different ways, in 2 different senses. Or if things fluctuate, are they consistent? So get them to think about 2 words and how they can be used together or not. And after you ask that, of course, you'd ask why or why not. Now, the most obvious answer, if things fluctuate, are they consistent, I think would be no. But you're liable to have some smart-ass kids in the class who are going to say, oh yes, because if it fluctuates in the same way, then that's consistent. And that's great, because they're doing a lot more thinking than the more obvious answer, what the more obvious answer would take them to. Next, create ways to bring words back. So just doing some interactions initially is good, but you need to do more. So teachers can use the words, can encourage kids to use the words, or take the words and apply them to new situations. Maybe apply them to the next text you're reading, even if the word itself doesn't appear in that text. You might be able to apply it to describing a situation or a character or a concept in a new text. And finally, challenge students to find their words outside of class. Have them bring them in, share them, and discuss their uses. And they can find them in books they're reading outside of class, in newspapers, magazines, on a TV show, anywhere. And we found that this is really effective. It really boosts what kids are learning about their words and how well they can comprehend contexts in which those words are used. Also, it doesn't cost much. It doesn't take up classroom time. Kids are doing it on their own. And most important, it really seems to motivate kids. They love the idea. They're finding their words outside of class. Wow, it's like they really exist. They're not just a school thing. So the bottom line is, for successful vocabulary growth, you need to give kids lots of opportunities to interact with words, both in and out of the classroom. Thanks, and I hope your students have fun with words.